Before I get into today's review, I just want to let you all know that this review does come with a trigger warning. I'm about to review a book that deals with abuse in many different ways: verbal abuse, physical abuse, the S word abuse, the R word to deal with the S word, to do with the S word of abuse. If this is too triggering for you, I completely understand. I just wanted you guys to be aware of this before I do get into today's reviews. So, yeah, now you have been warned. Okay, so today we are going to be reviewing this book, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Not a fan of the cover. I'm going to say that to start with because I have seen the other cover, the black and white one, and I do prefer it. However, we are going to get into this review. I hope that you paid attention to the trigger warning to begin with. Let's get right into this. If you have not seen my reviews before, I have two sections in my review. A spoiler-free section comes first, where I discuss 3 cons and 3 pros, spoiler-free, about this book. Then I go into the spoiler section and discuss everything that I want to talk about to do with the book in a spoilery way. So let's get right into it, shall we? First of all, starting off with my 3 cons about this book, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So my first con about this book is that it didn't end in a resolved spot, and I found this a little bit annoying. While I completely understand why, as it does make sense why it couldn't be wrapped up, by the end of the book, because it's something that anyone who goes through anything like this will go through it for probably most of their lives. The book ends really abruptly, and you feel like you're halfway through something that's going on and all of a sudden the book ends. So I really didn't appreciate that. I understand why it wasn't resolved, but I didn't appreciate that it wasn't resolved, and that is my first con, and that is the first thing that I'll warn you about is it doesn't feel all wrapped up by the time you get to the end. My second con for this book is that it can be a hard book to read for anyone who has dealt with abuse in the past. As I did say with my trigger warning before I began this video, this book deals with a lot of abuse. Verbal, physical, the S word of abuse, and the R word that we can't say on YouTube. If we could use the R word on YouTube, I would use it here because it is rather relevant to the story, but YouTube have brought out some rules recently, and one of those rules is you can't say the R word anymore on YouTube, so I'll respect that, but the R word is a major factor of this book. And these scenes that play out that are physically, mentally, the S word and the R word of abuse are rather graphic and rather detailed as well. Now, this was a bit of a con for me because I wasn't prepared for that going in. I knew that this book would deal with tough subject matter, and I was ready to read about that, but I wasn't prepared for just how graphic and how dark it does get. So I want to warn you, if you are planning on reading this book because of the content, and I do believe it is a book that should be read for the subject matter that is discussed, I do want to warn you that these scenes are very graphic, they're very detailed, so if that triggers you in any way, just best be warned before you do go into it, and I was not. I knew that it would deal with the subject matter, but I didn't know how far it was going to go, and Kate Elizabeth Russell did an amazing job of having you sit in the mind and the emotions of the victim who's going through all this stuff in a very raw and very real way. So my con is not that Kate Elizabeth Russell did this, but my con is more the fact that I was not warned about this prior to going in. So the lack of warning, and there isn't a warning at all in this book saying this contains some extremely graphic, and triggering information, to me, that's a con. I think it's something that should be written in the book so everyone is prepared. My third con for this book is I wish that our protagonist had made some different choices. Along the way, our protagonist has a bunch of choices that she needs to make. This book, in case you didn't know, is dual perspective. So it deals with a girl who goes to a boarding school, ends up in a relationship with one of her professors who, shall we say, psychologically abuses her in all the ways that I've already stated. And it's very graphic, as I said, for my second con. I've already alluded to that. There are a ton, so it's dual perspective. We have the perspective of the protagonist as she is going through the relationship. So we meet her before she's in the relationship, and we're there with her while she's in the relationship. The second perspective is her once she's out of the relationship and many years have gone by, and it goes back and forth. While I appreciate the two different perspectives of the during, the before and the during as one perspective, and the after as another perspective, there were decisions that this character needed to make, and I just felt that this character made some really bad decisions along the way, and I wish that she had made other decisions. I want it known that I understand that the character, and we need to keep in mind that while this book is written thanks to some experiences that some girls have had, and I'm very well aware of this. I've done a ton of research on this book. Kate Elizabeth Russell actually interviewed two survivors and got information from them that she then used to create this book. But this book is, while it focuses on real things that do happen, and while it's based on real experiences, the book itself is a work of fiction. And so when I look at it in that light, that it is a work of fiction, as real as it seems and as graphic as it is, I then look at the choices that the fictional protagonist is making. And I didn't agree with all the decisions that the fictitious protagonist was making. I understand why they occurred in real life, but for the sake of it being a fictional book, I didn't appreciate that. And now it's time for my 3 pros for My Dark Vanessa. So I've talked about my 3 cons. Here are my 3 spoiler-free pros of the book. My first pro is that this book is raw and goes exactly where it needs to. Despite my second con, where I talk about how graphic it is and the fact that there's no trigger warning, had there been a trigger warning, and looking at it from the view of if there was one, then one of my biggest pros is the fact that the book was raw and it went where it needed to. This book, to me, I view it in the light of it's a book that needed to be written because this subject matter is not discussed well enough or often enough at all. So the fact that Kate Elizabeth Russell chose to write a book regarding this subject matter is one thing, but she could have made light of the situation, but she doesn't. She goes as raw and as deep as she needs to go to be able to ensure that we get the raw, real deal of what's going on. And I do really appreciate that. So that is, despite the fact that there are a ton of triggers in this book, that is something that I really do appreciate, and that's my first pro for this book. My second pro for this book is very similar to the first, and that is that this is a book that needed to be put out there, and I'm extremely grateful that it is. The subject matter is not covered anywhere near enough. And so while my first pro deals with how raw it is and the fact that I view that as a positive, my second pro is more the fact that this book actually exists, because I think it's a really big risk for any author to take on such a tough subject matter and opt to write about that. I think that Kate Elizabeth Russell took a massive risk writing this book, but I appreciate it, and I definitely think it was well worth the gamble. And so my second pro about the book, as lame as it may seem to some people, to me, I think it's something that needs to be mentioned, and it's a massive pro. It's the fact that this book actually exists, that this subject matter is spoken about. I really, really do appreciate that. So that's my second pro for this book. My third pro for this book, three, is the fact that it is dual perspective. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while now, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of more than one perspective books, although there are some two or even three perspective books that I do enjoy. I feel that this book needed to be dual perspective. There are other books that I've read that contain more than one perspective where I've thought, oh, we don't need all these perspectives. In fact, it could have just been one perspective the whole way. Not so with this book. Because this book's first perspective is the beginning and the middle of the relationship that she has with her professor, and because the other perspective is her post that relationship with her professor, it wouldn't have worked to just pick one, or if one had just been picked, not as much ground would have been covered, and I don't think it would have been as well polished and well rounded, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It wouldn't have been as well rounded as it is. So the fact that we cover everything, we cover Vanessa as a child prior to her getting into the relationship, Vanessa going through the relationship at such a young age, and also then that second perspective that goes, and it goes back and forth. There is no one constant timeline. It's not like this book starts with Vanessa prior to the relationship, then Vanessa gets in the relationship, now we have Vanessa after the relationship. It is Vanessa before the relationship, now a bit of Vanessa after the relationship, now we start the relationship with Vanessa, and now we're going back again to after, and back into the relationship, and back to after, and it just works so well. I am not the biggest activist at all for dual perspective books, but this one needed it, and I so appreciate how well rounded having two perspectives was. So that is my third pro for this book. So wrapping up my spoiler-free section, this is I'm not gonna lie, this book is an incredibly tough book to read. There are triggering moments in there that if you have gone through anything like what Vanessa has gone through, it will trigger you because of how raw and real it is. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I will say that I was triggered by a number of things that propped up in this book because I didn't know how raw and real it was going to be. And there are certain things, not everything, but there are certain things that Vanessa went through in her relationship that I've gone through in the past. I don't want to delve into all of that, but I'm letting you know this for the sake of context within my review. I've gone through certain things in my past in relationships similar to what Vanessa has gone through, and therefore there were some triggers in this book for me, and they were very massive triggers reading this book. In saying that, though, this is a very important subject matter, and I'm so proud of Kate Elizabeth Russell for not only telling this story of My Dark Vanessa, but telling it in a way that was so raw and so real that it makes the telling of this subject matter so worthwhile. Had Kate Elizabeth Russell just picked a random girl and glossed over this subject matter, it would not have made the book worthwhile at all. But the fact that it is so raw and so real makes it arguably one of the best books that has ever been written. Did I enjoy myself reading this book? No, but I see the importance of this book. I gave this book 5 stars purely based on the importance and the rawness and the realness of the book because it deserved the 5 stars that it received. One thing that I am going to say here before I get into my spoiler section is that Kate Elizabeth Russell writes about the psychological issues that come up with any type of abuse when a young girl is in a relationship with an older guy. While I really do appreciate that, and I'm giving this a glowing review, 5 stars, I love it. One thing that I would love to see an author do now that this book has come out and garnered the success that it has garnered, I would like to see an author take a book like this but have the young character who's going through all this be a male. There's a point in the book, I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's a point in the book where these girls at the boarding school are being handed out whistles, the R word whistles. In case of, an emergency, you blow the whistle and it should stop the R person from committing the R act. Again, I can't say that word, so you know what I'm referring to. while the whistles are being handed out, one of the girls says to their house mother, that because it's at a boarding school, so to the house mother says, "What about the boys? Do the boys get one?" And everyone who's there at that table, aside from the girl who asks, all of the others are laughing, saying, "Why would boys need a whistle? This is not going to happen to them," and all that kind of stuff. I love this book, but I completely disagree with that point. It definitely does happen to men as well as women. And I think while I really appreciate that this book has come out, I would love to see Kate Elizabeth Russell, or anyone really, but especially Kate Elizabeth Russell because of how well she wrote this. I would like to see her release a book that it has a male protagonist as opposed to just a female protagonist. So I just think it would be a great accompaniment, and it would show across the board that this doesn't just happen to women, it happens to both genders. It is an important subject, and I'm not glossing over the fact that that she wrote about women, because I really appreciate this. I'm a massive feminist. Anyone who knows me knows that. But I just think a great accompaniment would be to have, I don't know, for example, My Dark Victor or something. So to have a male protagonist going through it as well, to uncover that side as well and show the truth behind male abuse as well as female abuse. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there, and that was just a moment I had to have, and I'm going to move into my spoiler section now, so I'll join you for that in just a moment. Alright, so let's get into the spoiler section of this book that I'm having trouble picking up, My Dark Vanessa. So if you're still with me, this is the spoiler section. I'm giving stuff away here, so if you don't want to see the spoilers, I completely understand, and I'll see you next time. But this is me jumping into the spoilers and what I thought of this book. So I've warned you enough. Let's get right into it. Here we go. I thought that this book was a good book. I already said that in my spoiler-free section, but it bears repeating. It was a good book, but it was really, really, really hard to read. The R scenes, which is really annoying that I can't say that word, but the R word scenes that play out in this book are really graphic. While I appreciate what Kate Elizabeth Russell was doing, I did find that extremely triggering because it's so descriptive. It's almost, I don't know. Yeah, it's almost unbearable to read. And I know I'm laughing here, but I'm laughing nervously. There were a lot of moments while I did keep reading and I didn't stop and walk away anytime something was hard to read. There were a lot of moments that shocked me in this book with just how far Kate Elizabeth Russell went, and the R word scenes were incredibly descriptive and incredibly hard to read. Vanessa's character I find to be intriguing when I strip back all of the abuse that goes on in this book. I think the fact that she's really dark, and while it's called My Dark Vanessa because that's what Strain calls her, I find the fact that Vanessa was already a dark character to begin with to be a really interesting choice. And because it's not just dark characters that this happens to. Now, this is not a criticism from me to Kate Elizabeth Russell. She could have picked any type of character as long as it was a female and she was young enough. It would have worked for the purpose of writing this book, but I just found it interesting that she was a dark character. I don't know. When I first heard the premise of this book and that, she was in a relationship with her teacher and her friends are trying to tell her, excuse me, to get out of this relationship, I thought back to, I don't know if you guys have seen this show or not, and if you haven't, I'll give you another example, but I thought back to Pretty Little Liars, the relationship between Ezra and Aria, who Aria is a girl in high school. She dates her English teacher, exactly the same as My Dark Vanessa, but their relationship outside of the age bracket is portrayed as really adorable. Both teacher and student get along really well. They both really clearly love each other. And while it is looked down upon when an older guy dates a younger woman, which I really think it should be both should be looked down upon. Not just an older guy dating a young girl, but an older woman dating a young boy should be looked down upon as well. Or an older guy dating a young boy, or an older woman dating a young girl should be looked down upon. The way that it's portrayed in Pretty Little Liars is it's almost like a classically beautiful relationship, and you almost forgive the age gap because of how much both sides are in love and they're both equally putting into the relationship, and it ends up being a really classically beautiful fictitious relationship, because that was a massive scandal with Pretty Little Liars, is, you know, this is not a good thing, and why do we have these characters who have such a big age gap in this really massive critically acclaimed show being together. But the producer of the show had a comeback, and her comeback was that fictitious characters, like, this needs to be taken with the grain of salt that they're fictional. So I don't have any problem with any fictional characters getting together of any age, provided they're really happy and all that. I thought that's what this book was going to be about. I thought that Strain, I didn't know his name at the time, but I do now. I thought that Strain and Vanessa were going to have a really loving relationship where both sides really loved each other and there were no issues there. But to me, the signs were incredibly obvious as you went along through the book. He is so horrible with her, and the fact that she doesn't see it kind of surprised me a little bit. At least she sees it towards the end, but she doesn't see any of it in the beginning. And there are moments where it just seems really obvious that there are issues going on there. Now, you can come back to me and say, well, Mr. Francy, you know, you weren't in the relationship, you don't know what's going on, you don't know what's going through her mind at that age. But here's the thing, when I was Vanessa's age, I dated an older guy. I did. Now, again, I'm not trying to get into my life, but I'm just making a point that I have been in Vanessa's situation, in that I dated an older guy, and I knew when things weren't going good and when they were, at least at that simplistic level, I knew that. And there were things that Strain did that were so obviously wrong that it felt really uncomfortable to read that Vanessa, who is really bright and really intelligent, wasn't picking up on that. Now, I don't begrudge her for remaining in a relationship where she loves this teacher. That's fine. That is what it is. And clearly he gaslights her and things like that. And that is much harder to pick up on. I understand that in reality. I understand that in the book. I get that. But the obvious things that he does, like when he, grabs her wrist to yank her onto the bus. How does she just think this is totally fine and, you know, I'm just going to keep dating this guy? That didn't make sense to me at all. Obviously, that's abuse. He was hurting you. How are you okay with this? And if this book was centered around Vanessa being someone who... What's that book? 50 Shades of Grey or whatever it's called. If she was a character like that who liked that kind of thing, different story, but she's not. So, considering how smart she is, there are obvious things that occur in this book that really surprised me that she didn't see them for what they were, and it just really annoyed me. And then afterwards, when she's trying to work out what's going on and trying to work out if it's a rape or not, okay, I said the word. I'm getting thrown off YouTube. Seriously, it's hard to not say the word. I'm sorry that I did. But it's hard not to say the word because it's what comes up in this book. When she is assaulted by Strain, and I'm getting a little angry here because I want to defend how intelligent she is, and I'm surprised that she's not making this connection. The first time it happens, Vanessa says no. And then she starts crying and yelling out, no, stop, don't do this. And he keeps going and she doesn't see it as rape. I'm saying it again. You know what? It is what it is. I'm sorry. It's you can't not say that word while you're reviewing this book in a spoilery way. How does she not see that for what it was? I don't understand. The way it's described, we are literally in her head. She knows it's wrong. She's screaming out no. She's crying out for him to stop, and he keeps going, and she knows in her mind that that is what this is. And then she backpedals and says, no, it wasn't, but it was, and she knew it at the time, and that angered me that she didn't come forward, and or even if she didn't come forward, why she stopped admitting to herself that it was, because she knew that it was. And that's really frustrating. I found that to be an inconsistency. Now, maybe one of the two people that Kate Elizabeth Russell interviewed, maybe that was how it was for them. They thought it was the R word at the time that it was going on, but once it was over and they looked back upon it, they didn't look at it as the R word. And if that's the case, and if that's what she's basing that on, then that's totally fine. But that's not explained. It's not explained that she says, oh, so at the time, like even to herself, she's thinking it internally. At the time, I thought it was, and I was pretty certain that was, but now I'm not so sure and I don't think it was. No, she just goes from, it is, I'm saying no, he keeps going, I know this is, and she literally thinks, I know he is doing the R word to me right now. And then suddenly it's, oh no, he never did that to me. And it's different when she's talking to other people. I get that she doesn't want to admit that he did that because of all the repercussions that Strain has threatened. I love gaslighting. Oh my god. That Strain has threatened is going to happen to her, but at least to herself, I don't get that. I don't understand, and I wish that it was at least explained. I wish that Kate Elizabeth Russell could have taken a couple of pages to say, I thought it was at the time, but now that I think about it more, I don't think it is. She does make a point where she does think to herself, he asked permission for this, and this, which he did. But when he asked permission to do the actual thing, she says no. So I also don't understand how, as intelligent as she is, because she's a very intelligent young lady, how she doesn't connect that and say, well, he asked permission for a lot of different things, but with that one, he asked permission, I said no, and he still did it anyway. I don't see how she doesn't make that connection. It's not that I don't understand the mental aspects of going through the R word, because I'm not going to go into it, but I will just say I do understand 100% the mental aspects of going through that. It's not easy, no, and it's really tough to deal with, and you're not here to hear my experiences, but I just want you to know that I'm not saying this having no experience. I've been in situations. I know how certain things played out for me, and I don't understand certain aspects of this with her. So please don't think that I'm sitting here saying this is wrong and Kate Elizabeth Russell clearly doesn't know what she's doing, because I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, considering how smart she is, the fact that she said no, she said it many times, she cried it out many times, then she starts full on physically crying, and she knows in her mind he's not listening and that it is the R word, and then moments later she thinks, oh no, it's not, with no, I don't understand that. That just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, in saying that, the book is highly triggering, but what I do appreciate is by the end of the book, she seems to finally be starting to deal with it. I wish the book had gone on a bit longer so we could see more of her trying to deal with it. But yeah, it is an incredibly tough book to read. And anyone who is going into this book thinking, oh, yay, the subject matter, I'm glad that it was brought up in a book, and let's read this, and this should be a nice, fun, not fun, but a good experience of reading about the subject matter. Yes, it is, but you need to know just how graphic it is and just how triggering it is. I'm not saying don't read it. I'm just saying be forewarned. And that you may need to have moments where you read a chapter or a couple of pages and then you have to put the book down and process things. I did not do that. I kept going through it. I think for me it was more just the shock of how real and raw it was. But just be prepared for that when you do go into it. But in saying that, I did give it 5 stars because for what it is and the purpose that it serves, I am so happy that this book exists. And not only that, but Kate Elizabeth Russell did an amazing job of holding no punches. She goes right into every moment, not holding back, completely real, completely raw, and I very, very much appreciated that. So 5 stars for this one. This was a much more serious review than what I normally do. I mean, normally I have a lot more fun with the reviews that I do. It's just that this book, even though it is a fictional book, it kind of demands a very serious review. So that's what I'm giving you. Again, I do recommend that you read this book. This is a book that had to be written for so many reasons, and this book is written incredibly well. The writing style is really easy to read. It's not a simplistic book by any means, but the writing is really easy to read, so you shouldn't have problems with that. But just be warned with the trigger warnings that can come up because there are a lot of them. But my final note is Kate Elizabeth Russell, thank you so much for releasing this book. I really appreciate how far you went to show the rawness and the realness of what goes on in a situation like this. And I really hope that you release an accompaniment book of My Dark Victor or a book about a boy who goes through the same thing, just to show that it does happen to both sides. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to let you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. And I'll see you in my next video. Mwah. Bye, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.